So we've talked a little bit about the beginning of your career. Tell us a little bit about the flow of your career. So you started out in radio at the Fan, and then when did you head out to BC during this span?
So I went to the Fan before, I went to BC before the Fan.
Before the Fan.
So when I was doing that Albion Mall radio station, my internship through Humber College, I had a couple of options. One was in Fort McMurray, Alberta, and one was in Kelowna. And Kelowna was a better option for me, so I went to Kelowna to work at a station called The Lizard, which I think now is called Power 104.7 Kelowna's Best Rock. And that's where I went for a few months to do my internship. I hosted a metal show on Monday nights called High Voltage. I was an intern in the music department. I would photocopy stuff and listen to the music director and the program director's conversation about songs. I learned a lot there. And then I would, because I was broke and I wasn't getting paid, they gave me a job as the mascot of the radio station. So, because no one else at the station wanted to do it, it was starting to get warm out, and it was just a disgusting. It was like a Roman bath being inside.
Tell me, what did you have to? What was the outfit that you? What was it? A lizard
giant
outfit?
Lizard, yeah, giant green lizard. You know, thank God back then no one had cameras. Nobody had cameras, right? So there's only one picture that I have of me as a lizard, and it's hilarious. And I am so hot and sweaty and gross in that lizard costume. But this is before I went straight edge, so I used to get liquored up and put the costume on at 3 o'clock in the morning and go strolling.
I would have loved to see you.
It was so funny. I was 21 years old. I was basically what you are now. That's when I went out and did that.
I'm liquored up now, by the way, just so you know, just so we have the mirror image.
You're pulling it off.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I came back to the Fan.
Then you came back to the Fan, and then from there you went to...
Here's another reason to go to college if you can.
Yes.
Barry Davis, who's on Rogers Sportsnet now, Barry was in school with me at Humber College. He got a job at the Fan as an op, you know, the guy that would press the buttons and play the commercials and put the callers on the air.
Yeah.
That guy. They were looking, it was a new station, they were looking for people. Barry told this guy, Rick, who ran the hiring of that job, said, hey, I got my friend George who's got this gig in Kelowna, it's going to end, would you hire him? So I came home from work one day, and there was a post-it note from my roommate on my door, and it said, call Rick at the Fan. So I called him, he goes, when are you coming home? I said, I'll come home when you give me a job. He said, well, why don't you just come home and I'll give you a job as an op. And just hired me like that over the phone. And I called my friend, he flew out, met me in Kelowna. We got in this 87 Pontiac Sunbird and drove it all the way across America and came back to Toronto, and I started there because of the contacts that I made in school.
Wow. And then from the Fan, you moved into 102.1?
Yeah, then I went to the Edge. I remember calling the program director of the Edge and said, you don't know me, and I'm not looking for a job, but I just want you to know I'm in the market. So is it okay if from time to time I send you a tape of my show? I was doing a talk show. And I got a feeling that I wasn't really going to grow that much at the Fan. I knew I kind of hit a ceiling. Guys like me weren't really, they were fine to put us on late at night and whatever. The bosses were fantastic, but I didn't see where I was never going to be on in the middays. I was never going to be on in the afternoons, right?
Afternoons,
so, the evenings. I was just going to always be the overnight guy, if that. So, and they were lovely to me. The guys at the Fan, Nelson Millman, Alan Davis, Bob Mackwitz, were so great to me. Like, they really let me figure this out, right? And they helped me get there. But I knew that there were some limitations with that then reality of the Fan. So I called this guy Stu Myers and I sent him out this tape, and that was it. And he said, yeah, you can just totally give me a tape if you want. And that was the end of it. I didn't talk to him again. And then one day, I got a call from him. I had done the overnight shift. I was exhausted. I went home and I slept for a couple hours. This was back in the day when we had pagers.
Yeah.
And I had a pager went off and it was from him. So I called him and he says, hey, can you come down and meet me? I said, sure. And I went down and I sat in his office and he said, look, here's the thing. He said, let's go for a walk. And I said, okay. He said, I don't have a job. I don't have a job for you, but I want to hire you. So why don't you just come over here and trust me? I'm going to tell everybody that you're just going to hand out tickets and in promotions. Stuff that I had done at the Lizard.
Right.
But at this point now, and at the Fan, but at this point I had my own show on the Fan, right? I was on the air 5 days a week. So he said, just come over and trust me. I'll find a spot for you. Mm-hmm. I said, okay. And for some reason I trusted him. And I went and I filed my notice at the Fan, which was really hard to do.
Yeah, I bet it was.
Really hard. Because I kind of figured I'd be there my whole career when I first got there, right? And then I went to the Edge, and Stu just put a little note on the board that says, you know, welcome to this new guy. He's just going to be handing out tickets down at the storefront studio. Maybe he'll yak on the mic from time to time. And it never bothered me. Like, I don't have an ego about this job, right? So it never bothered me that that's how I was introduced. And then very quickly, he kept his word, and I was on the air, then I was on the air more, then I was on the air more. Then he gave me the afternoon magazine show called Live in Toronto. And from that, I got hired at Much Music because Much Music needed an interviewer, right?
Yeah.
And also, when I was at the Edge, TSN had started Off the Record.
With Michael
Michael
Landsberg.
So Bob, who worked with me on Game, he got a job there, and then I went over to help them in the early days of writing and help them book it while I had the Edge job, you know, and then Much Music came along.
And then, of course, the Much Music years is where it kind of took off, right?
Much Music is where, I mean, obviously just being on national television, you get a lot of attention. And at the time I got on Much Music, I think it was 27, 28 years old, right? Which makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Getting on the air at 20, I don't know why they hire people who are 20. It's really difficult, man. And you can do it, but if you want to develop, you want to figure your way out, if you want to be interesting, you have to actually live a life.
Well, what are you saying? Are you saying you felt a bit old there?
No, I was old relative to what they were doing, but to what they're doing now.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was Master T, Sookie Lee, Rick Campanelli, Rachel Perry, the Navigani Kiwanuka, Ed the Sock. Like, we were adults.
Yeah.
We were adults. And that's important because to be on national television as an adult is way easier than being on national television as a kid. Because when people hate you and they rip you and they come after you or newspaper, all that stuff, you have to be equipped to deal with that, right?
Right, you have to have tough skin.
Yeah, man, you have to develop that stuff. So when I got to Much, I was 27, 28. But my contemporaries were, you know, adults as well. I mean, it's hard to say that 27 seems so young, but at the time, right? So that's a reason why I think I was able to get another job and carry on a career, is because I was able to develop.
Right. So there's this kind of misconception about broadcasting and about this industry that it all depends on luck. And as you were saying, how, you know, talent is very overrated. But I think there's a certain skill that you have to have in keeping yourself informed every single day, keeping yourself connected to everything, every genre, every medium.
But see, I think that's what that boils down to is authenticity.
Right.
Are you authentically inspired by the job? Are you authentically interested in the information and the flow of information? If you are, then you just do it naturally.
Exactly.
Right? Then you are. So it's easy to stay up on things if that's what you'd be doing anyway.
Right. So my question to you is, how did you do all that before the internet came along?
Yeah, that's the most bizarre thing. Wow, man, you actually had to work.
Yeah,
you actually had to read
books and
read a lot of books and read a lot of newspapers. You had to talk to people and figure stuff out. You couldn't just Google and get an answer, right?
Yeah.
I think this generation that you're in now is a results-based generation, not an actual critical thinking generation, right? There are lots of critical thinkers in it, but as a rule, if you want an answer to something, you just Google it.
Yeah.
It's
that easy. I'm so proud.
But you never have to actually spend 2 days trying to remember a song.
Right.
That doesn't sound like a big deal. But the big deal in that is you need your brain to learn how to figure things out. You have to figure things out as opposed to search and result.
Right.
What are you doing that's how you interview people, right? That's how you learn to interview. Somebody gives you an answer. You're looking in their eyes and you're just like, you've seen that look before. Remember something you read, and your brain is trained to figure it out. So you figure it out. That's why when I see people who don't know how to figure stuff out, but they're good at gathering information.
Yeah.
They're two different skills. Your trick is to be able to marry the two.
So we're talking a little bit.
I used to have to rip. I'm not going to read these, but
no.
There's this machine that would be like, this type would come up.
Yeah.
Right? I'd have to rip the paper off, take it in a word processor, rewrite a story, make your own news, and run into the newsroom and do it again. I remember the day Tupac got shot. I was there and they came across the wire. Now the guys that were older than me couldn't believe the technology we had, right? It was just every generation is different.
Right.
But I was in that last group of people that actually had to think and rewrite and figure out as opposed to just search and, if you wanted to know something, you'd have to call somebody. Like I'd be like, hey, I'm gonna figure out something's going on. And something as simple as the weather. What's the weather going to be like in Denver? We're doing a sports story, right? What's the weather going to be like? You had to call a radio station or call somebody in Denver to try to ask some questions about the weather. Through that, you can maybe understand what kind of football game was going to be, so you can make better analysis when you were doing your talk show about sports. In that experience, you talked to 2 or 3 different people to get to the answer you needed. And you do that enough, you now have relationships with 2 or 3 different people. They would call you if you need something, you would call them. So you'd actually network all these people out there that you had to talk to, and you grew together. There are people that I know now in my life who I knew back then in that context, right?
Do you think that because of how easy it is now that broadcasters will be a bit less skillful in terms of how they get their information, in terms of sources? Do you think that provided you a little bit more, what am I trying to say here? What I'm trying to say is I think since information is so readily available, then it becomes a lot more, people think it becomes a lot more easier to do this. Yeah. Is that the case?
Well, it's not easier to do this. Definitely not. It's easier to interview me because you have access to more information about me, right? So it's easier to acquire the research, but you still have to do something with the research, right? Yeah. So that's why that will never get easier. Right, so I don't worry about that so much. I think it's amazing that there are so many tools at your disposal. I think they're amazing there are so many tools. So I don't think it holds you back in many ways, except this version of the internet generation, this version of young, whatever, prospective broadcasters, they read it on the internet so they think it's true. Yeah. They do think Wikipedia is a hard and fast source, and it's not. It's not. Yeah. Wikipedia is really cool. Glad we have it. But it's not journalism, to quote Wikipedia. It's not journalism. People think that, somebody making a headline on a tweet, which becomes a trend, that's a news headline. It's not a news headline. There's no burden of proof on the internet, right? There's no burden of proof. And, CBC News can't go out and do something that violates journalistic practices. They'll get destroyed for it, right? But some idiot on Twitter can, and no one cares.
Well, see, that's also, I would say, the dark side of all this, is that anybody now, any blogger, any social media person can just go on and pretend like they're an expert when really they're not.
Right, and so why I think that's okay, though, this is kind of why I like it, because I'm a really big believer in the individual accountability. Right. So I don't mind all the noise and all the trolls on YouTube comments, even though there are... Look, the internet is filled with some of the most beautiful human beings on the world and the most touching stories. It's also the home of the trolls, right? And so what that does is it forces you as the consumer and the user, you have to make judgments. Mm-hmm. You have to decide what you believe, what you don't believe. You have to decide how much research you're going to do in a story. If you want to be an informed individual, you really have to, you got to swim through the sharks to get to that island. And so I like that. Because it's like it. Yeah, because it doesn't let the listener off, doesn't let the viewer off, doesn't let the new broadcaster off the hook. Right. You can get it wrong.